Let's look at some of the papers now. Nick Rushworth joining me here on the set. Morning to you, Nick.
Hi to you, Will.
Beginning with what many papers are leading with, the coronavirus.
Well, that is the top story on front pages and the inside pages. I want to go to the Nigerian paper, the largest circulation daily in that country, Punch, which is leading on the first infection in the country, so the first infection in sub-Saharan Africa. The paper says an Italian citizen arrived at Lagos airport from Milan for a business trip on Tuesday and is now in a Lagos hospital. The patient is stable. There are no serious symptoms. The paper, though, saying that the Nigerian Senate is critical of the federal government for just not doing enough to screen passengers coming in. Of course, the WHO in recent days has flagged up a main concern about what could happen to Africa with the coronavirus epidemic in terms of health infrastructure, because it's so fragile there.
Yeah, this, of course, worrying because it's also Africa's most populous nation. Nick, you've been looking at some of the Chinese papers as well, and authorities have once again been presenting an upbeat message in terms of how they've been handling the crisis.
Well, we've seen that before, haven't we? And I want to go to the Shanghai Daily, which has this headline, Expert Tips April End for Outbreak Control. So that is perhaps for some, an optimistic scenario. Now, that expert is Zhong Nanshan. He heads a committee of experts on the crisis in China. He argues that COVID-19 will be largely contained in the country over the next 2 months. And he says the virus might not have originated in China. So that's very much the government take, if you like, on the situation there. I want to go to another Chinese paper, the South China Morning Post, which is talking about, it's a comment piece actually, talking about solidarity over the use of face masks. Now, there you can see they're scarce in Hong Kong. Let's spare them for the people most in need. Now, the argument is that always wearing a mask just because you feel better to be safe than sorry is just not a realistic option now. Supplies are limited. If everyone were to go outside with a face mask in Hong Kong, there's 7.6 million people there, then you would need 200 million a month is the message. They're just not there. So, of course, that whole question of masks, getting them or not, the piece there saying they need to be stockpiled seriously for future epidemics.
Yeah, and that's examining a little bit about the psychological fear that many people have when they're reading the headlines. And one main U.S. magazine picking up on that, about how we can manage the thoughts in our heads.
Well, this is the U.S. magazine Time. I love this article, and it's one I'd recommend for people today, which is how to manage your anxiety about coronavirus. Now, one of the tips, Will, is do not watch 24/7 news. It's
Do watch France 24, though.
Well, yeah, but no, do not watch 24/7 news. It can only pump up your stress. You've got to acknowledge in your mind that there are probably going to be disruptions for people, school closures, remote working, self-quarantine. So adjust to that. Imagine how you would see yourself in that kind of situation. Stop obsessive thoughts. Say stop out loud to yourself, or pull a rubber band on your wrist to say, no more about coronavirus, because the message there is worrying will not change a thing.
And the coronavirus are not the only story we're covering here at France 24. Here in France, papers are headlining about the annual cinema awards.
Well, it's the top story for Le Parisien aujourd'hui en France, which is saying that controversial Césars, we've got a lot of issues. We've got pay parity between men and women. And also, if we go to the front page of Libération, the whole question of the film director Roman Polanski. There you can see a picture of him. Now, his film J'accuse, which is called An Officer and a Spy in English, I went to see it and enjoyed it very much, is highly controversial. He's got 12 nominations for that movie, but of course he's been accused of rape in the past. He's fled US justice for decades now, hasn't he? So that is just going to be a huge source of tension for the ceremony. It's the equivalent of the Césars, of the BAFTAs and the Oscars, and it'll be on this evening. Polanski is saying, if I go to that, he's decided not to go, I will be subject to a public lynching because tension is really focused on him and on that film. So Libération saying the various clans in the French cinema industry are really at odds over just how to deal with the Polanski question.
Yes, and we'll be seeing that ceremony kicking off here, as well as women's rights groups who will be protesting it because of Roman Polanski's nomination.